Yeah, Australia was a great trip. It was more of a road trip than a world championship because to go to the other side of the world, you had to enjoy yourself and to see as much as you could. I say it's experience of Australia. It was really a microcosm of Queensland that I went to. Tiny little tiny area that I explored, but great fun. So the picture here, you can see the winner in number 35 and Ian Vickers in 61. He was second. And it turned out with all the audio visual that they had, it was a battle royal for these two, and it kept all the competitors engrossed. There was a cinema in Australia, and whenever they had an A-heat and the battle between these two, it was a full house. I mean, you had 40 or 50 people watching the audio visual. It was really exciting. But more of that a little later. So I'll split this up into a few sections. I'll talk a little bit about my experience of Australia, talk about Gladstone itself, which is quite an interesting town and city, a little bit about the event and how 11 members of Gladstone's Radio Sailing Club put on what was probably the best World Championship event ever, and then talk a little bit about my sailing demise and a few learnings. So Australia, when you do the research for it, as well as having sort of fantastic vistas and beautiful scenery, you come across this thing, what can kill you in Australia? Pretty much anywhere on land, there are things that can kill you. And anywhere in the sea, there are things that can kill you. So in the sea, you've got sharks, you've got crocodiles, jellyfish, and the most impressive one was a little 12-centimetre blue-ringed octopus. Now, that's got enough venom to kill what they say is 28 people. So if you ever have a noisy pool party next door, you know what to lob in the pool to quiet them all down. So basically, this is Australia. I went to this little bit here. And Queensland is an area where they say all the bad things live. To have a little nip at you. But I have to say, despite spiders, snakes and all sorts of things on land, I was there for 5 weeks. I didn't see a single snake, and I didn't see a spider that I thought might want to try and kill me. I saw spiders, but they all looked stripy and fairly friendly. So it's interesting with all the bad press that you get with all the bugs and things. It's really just a wonderful, wonderful country. And they're also, now you can click, they're also really nice things. I mean, the bird life down there is astonishing. There are hundreds of different breeds of birds that you can hear, and some of the noises are just quite enchanting. They're also the friendly koalas. I never saw one in the wild, despite looking for them. They're quite hard to spot because they sit in the nooks of trees and they're really hard to see. But there was a koala sanctuary and a zoo I went to, and you could get up close to them. I really wanted to give one a cuddle, but when I went to Australia Zoo, one of my tickets said I could go to the hospital, the animal hospital, before the zoo opened. And there was a little koala in a stick. He was dehydrated, so he had a drip on him. And there was a lady there clearing the eucalyptus leaves out from the floor. And I thought, oh, that's really cute. She left, and then this thing decided to have a wee. And it was quite significant. And he only eats eucalyptus leaves. And a lady later told me it's really smelly and you don't want that on your clothing. So I didn't really want to have a cuddle with a koala after that. But there's just loads of lovely wildlife there. Great, great place. So the other thing, they have kangaroos, and in the opening ceremony, they had an animal welfare group turned up, and they had these baby joeys all wrapped up because they wee and poo like babies. But you have never seen a bunch of grown men dissolve with these things. They just literally passed them around, and whoever got hold of them, it was just like, oh, little Joey. And I thought, I wonder what would happen if you had 3 babies and doing the same thing. Would there be such an attraction? But they really were cute. So, yeah, so my experience of Australia, don't read all the press. It's a beautiful country. yes, there are things that might attack you, but as they said at the zoo, if you stay 5 metres away from the water's edge, the crocs won't get you. So that's a little bit about Australia. And then Gladstone is a very interesting town in itself. It's one of the main export ports for minerals in Australia. It's a natural harbour. It's got big islands just offshore, a couple of miles offshore, which protect it from any seas that come from inside the barrier reef. The barrier reef's about 30 miles away, so Gladstone's a good point to sort of jump off and go and see the islands outside. Where are you going?
Just testing.
Can you go back? Right. Pay attention. Sorry. Where was I? So yeah, big mineral export. It's got an interesting history. Going back to the Great Recession in the 1920s, it was a small port then, and the Port Authority during the recession decided to continue the expansion of wharves in the shipping wharves in the area. The benefit was about 10-15 years later when World War II broke out and the Americans needed a base for their Pacific campaign. So they saw Gladstone, they saw it had infrastructure and facilities, so they said that'll do for us. So they got a load more money pumped into the Gladstone infrastructure. And then later, once the war had finished and they wanted to find a place to export coal, then Gladstone became the prime target. And that was the first export port for mineral wealth in Australia. And now you've got an LNG plant, you've got 2 alumina plants, you've got an aluminium plant, you've got a massive power station to provide power for all these things. And associated with it, click, is a healthy dose of pollution. And you can see it in the skies in early morning and late in the evening. But the benefit is it gives you the most fabulous sunsets. And this was a view from my Airbnb pad, which had a really nice balcony overlooking the sailing club and the river. And every night there was a stunning sunset, which is very good with cool beer. So pollution does have its advantages. So in the harbour at Gladstone, I mentioned creepy crawlies earlier. We had, they have, what's it, bullnose sharks, I think they're called. And that's one of the main predators in the area. And there was a Swiss guy who got very hot during one day during the World's Week, and he decided to strip off and go for a swim. So he wandered down this bank, got up to his waist, and one of the locals saw him and just screamed at him to get out of the water because they were really worried about sharks having a go at him, because you never know where they are. And in fact, one day during the week, there was also a tiger snake, which is this thing about 2 meters long. So we're all standing there waiting for the start of a race. And down below us, this snake was just sitting there, waiting. And then all the boats came by and he disappeared. But you just never know what's in the water. So just a quick mention while I'm on this slide about Airbnb. I was there for 5 weeks. I had 5 different places where I stayed, which were all Airbnb. Fantastic service. You can cancel the day before, you can book the day before. It's completely flexible, unlike a hotel. And for the whole 5 weeks, I spent on average about 40 quid a night for accommodation. One of those weeks was in a brand new house with nobody in it. It was fantastic. So highly recommend it, or recommend looking at it. Okay, next slide. So Gladstone, really nice town. This is a picture of the coal export wharf where they lined 3 ships at a time and they fill them up with coal and send them off to Southeast Asia. You can see there are 3 cranes and they have hoppers on the end. And along here is a massive conveyor belt on which they load coal, and it runs out to the cranes, gets diverted up onto the crane, and then they drop the coal through a hopper into the ship. And the first day I was there, 3 ships came in, they lined them up on the wharf, filled them up with coal, and a day and a half later they were gone. And then another ship came in. And they export about 8.5 million tonnes of coal a year from this port. That's just through the ships. And then they have trains nearly 2 kilometres long that they fill up with coal and send off into various parts of Australia. Really is a massive export. The only downside of this is coal dust is in the air, and every morning I had to wipe the table on my balcony to get the coal dust off it because it's settled every morning. So that's a little bit about Gladstone. Really interesting town, has a colonial feel about it. A lot of the houses are on stilts, they all have balconies. They tend to have these sort of metal white roofs to reflect the heat. And really a very pleasant place to stay. So this was the venue for the World Championships, and it's a perfect location for sailing. So the big red blob, that basically shows the control area where competitors stood. And the wind generally came from Spinnaker Park down to the race area. Now that was the theory. The problem was when the event started, the wind blew from the opposite direction and they couldn't set a course for 3 hours until the wind shifted round. But before I cover the racing, it's quite astonishing to think that local members of the 11 people in their radio sailing club launched from a bank just here, and if you go too far out, as somebody found, you go into 3 feet of mud, which is not very pleasant. And they walk out on this fishing wharf, which has no railing, and it's about 20 feet above the sea. And if you fall in, who knows what's going to get you. But they had that, and they had a public toilet, which is just there, and a big flat car park. And those were the facilities, that was the infrastructure that they had to hold the World Championship. So they formed a committee of 4 or 5 people, and their main job was to go out and get sponsorship from the community and involve the community. There was a guy called Grant Cooper who ran a media and advertising business called Cooper Mackenzie, and he was a bit of he ran a he ran a live streaming service for one of the biggest yachting events on the east coast of Australia, which is a race from where did I land? Brisbane up to Gladstone. They live streamed the start of the event with interviews with skippers, with cameras on boats, and they connect everything together and broadcast this across Australia. So he was the perfect man to organise this event and put on live streaming, the best of which we've ever seen. So these guys went out to get sponsorship. They pulled in $300,000, which is about 180 grand, of sponsorship in kind or cash, which is quite an astonishing thing to do. And the way they were so cool in the way they organised the event. On Wednesday, I went to the site and it was empty. On Wednesday evening, a barge turned up, a big platform, which was going to be our launch area. On Thursday, an army of contractors and volunteers came in to build the site, and the scaffolders had to put wooden blocks along each side of the fishing wharf and then build railings and then build a 20-foot platform on the very end of the wharf for competitors to stand on to race. It was quite amazing to see all this come together. As well as that, they laid AstroTurf across the car park, and then they put up all these shades, weighted shades, which were all logoed, donated by the Harbour Authority, so that we could rig our boats on nice grass, well, artificial grass, and be protected from the sun. It was really amazing. This all came together in 2 days, and it just happened so seamlessly and so smooth. So on Sunday, when we were ready for measuring, absolutely everything was in place, and there wasn't a hiccup. And you couldn't really see anybody moving or anything happening. It just did. It was really impressive. So that's the event. As I said, on the first day, the wind blew from the wrong direction, and we sat for 3 hours. The commentators did a marvellous job. So part of the live streaming, they had 4 commentators, 2 of which were veteran whipwreck round the world sailors, and one was a very capable lady yachtsman who was also been an board member on Maersk and Holcim. She was very impressive as well. And then there was Grant Cooper himself, who'd been a radio presenter for 19 years. So a really impressive team to provide good updates on the sailing. And I think they kept everybody interested who was watching. Something like 10,000 views have been made of each day's video, which is available on Facebook. So it's had a really strong reach across the marketplace. And they were able to use the thought of the live streaming to get sponsorship, because 3 times an hour they would show adverts for the Port Authority, Bendigo Bank and other sponsors there. So really impressive how they put it all together. So it just shows how a very small team of people can put on one of the best events in the world if you have the right sort of skills on that team. So then it comes down to my sailing. Is that the time? Yeah, so then it came on to my sailing. Bit of a disappointing performance. I was second in the first seeding race. Then I was last in A heat, last in B heat, last in C heat, and ended up in D heat, wondering, if you click on the next slide, oh, and another one. That's it. That's how I felt after race 4. I mean, I did not know how not to finish last. It was wherever there was trouble, I was in it. But thankfully in race 5, I got promoted back to C heat, and then I sort of bounced up and down. Mainly I sailed in B heat and ended up with a sort of mid-fleet result, which was okay considering what happened. I also had 2 broken shrouds, and I haven't broken a shroud all year. I got called out by a judge just after my best start of the week. I was about 2 boat lengths clear of the fleet, and he blew the whistle on me because he thought I'd had a particular incident. And this was Gordon Davis, the chief judge, and he's a Brit, and I quizzed him about it, and he said, well, when I explained the event, he said, well, you were in the right. I said, well, why did you blow the whistle? He said, well, we can't always see clearly, so we might not have had a full view. And I said, well, if you don't have a full view, how can you blow the whistle on me? So, yeah, that was another race down the pan. So it was an interesting experience. So as to the learnings, I presume that's the clock on time there. As to the learnings from the event, actually, you've probably spotted, and I know a number of you have already placed their orders, that if you had a design with a V, like a Viz, a Venti, or a V12, then you had a competitive boat. And it seems the favourite's the V12, from what I hear about the number of boats being ordered, or the people who've put themselves on the waiting list. But there is a group called Redcliffe Sailing on Facebook, and if you go onto their site, there's slow motion videos of the main designs going through the water. And it's quite interesting to see how the boats actually track through the water, how some are a bit more bouncy than the others. You can make your own judgment as to which one the best is. Personally, I think the Venti is probably the best all-round boat. The V12 is the best boat for breeze and a chop, and the Viz, the new Croatian boat, is probably the best for light weather, because that's how it's been optimized. We believe Ian Vickers in his V12 should have won the event. He had a bit of bad luck. He had a coming together in one race and a bit of misfortune in another. And that just set him back a little bit, allowing Zonko to get many points ahead. But Ian Vickers nearly caught him. And the 2 leaders were 1 point apart at the end after 20 races, which is staggering. In terms of rigs, the Venti and the V12 had very simple rigs. You know, very much like if you look at a Britpop or any of the boats in the club here, the rigs were very similar. Ian Vickers is so simple, he even has a wire hook for the jib tie down. That's all he uses, doesn't change it, and very, very simple. And he just focuses on sailing quick. The Croatian boat, the new Viz, it's a lot more complex. If you look at pictures of Zonko Jelisic's boat who won, he can move the jib boom forwards and back, he can move it up and down. He's got shrouds that don't enter the mast. Where the shrouds go touch the mast, it doesn't enter there. It goes through a little eye and goes up to about 3 inches from the top of the mast. And I assume he's done that to try and stiffen the mast a little bit at the top so he can increase his rig tension by applying more backstay. So the Viz is a much more complicated boat to sail, and probably a bit more expensive as well. Because when I priced it, it was $6.5 grand to get a package, and that was before VAT and shipping and import cost. So you need a big paycheck for that one. So those are the rigs, and then finally, what did I learn? Preparation is everything. And despite intense preparation, I blew an RMG winch up after 3 days of sailing in Australia. The boat started leaking, so I had a crack in a centerboard case, but I fixed that with lots of silicone grease. And I had a spiral winch on which didn't work very well, so I threw that away and got a standard winch in place. But other than that, the broken shrouds, they were the only issues I had. So despite preparation, it all went a bit pear-shaped. Racing in the Worlds and the Europeans is about fine margins. Blink and you go from the front of the fleet to the middle of the fleet. Before you know it, you're actually looking at demotion. It's really, really tight racing. So you have to think about the conditions, make sure you've got the right sails on your boat. I put a light jib on my boat for top-end A-rig conditions all week, which was really a big mistake. And the jib now looks very sad. The other thing you have to do at an event like this is you've got to measure everything and be able to put your boat on the water and know it's going to be right for the conditions. Where we launched, it was flat calm. You pushed your boat out, you had to sail 50 yards before you got into the conditions you were going to race in. And if you had not got your setting right, you couldn't turn around and bring the boat back because it would be take you too long and you'd miss the next start. So you have to get the setup right first time. The other thing is you need the boat to sail itself. There are conditions where it's sailing dead away from you, and the only indication of how the boat's performing is the angle of the mast to the water. So you have to be confident the boat can sail on its own and is balanced. And then the final thing I learned was starting. And I know there's one person who sails here who's been practicing like mad to hold his boat stationary on the start line. Well, that's kind of what I did in the early starts at the Worlds. And you kind of bag your position on the start line, whether it's at the windward end or in the middle. But the trouble is, if boats creep up behind you and they're moving forward slightly, they're going to make less leeway than you are, because your only choice to move is to pull the sails in and the boat will go sideways. So after getting caught out a couple of times, I started to hang back and then gradually creep in and go underneath people. And because I was moving and they weren't, the windward boats were really struggling to keep away from me, and the boats to leeward were drifting away. So I always had a gap to leeward on the start line because I was sneaking in from the back. And those were the sort of key learnings from the event. So was it a success? For me, it absolutely was. It was a brilliant road trip. Just wonderful to see a bit of Australia. Great racing, made loads of friends, and really enjoyed it. And on that note, happy Christmas.
We've got time for a couple of questions. I will start. What boat did you sell?
I sailed an alley-off. They had me listed as a V11, I think it was. Yeah, I tried to get it corrected, but they never did.
So V2 or V3?
V3, two-piece.
Two-piece?
Yeah.
Right. Any other questions of couple of ways.
Yeah.